Okay, let's talk about the upper limb veins and lymphatics. And as we do, we're going to answer a few questions like, how does blood return from the upper limb to the heart? What is the difference between superficial and deep venous drainage? And what is the pathway of lymphatic drainage for the upper limbs? Let's start by talking about the different types of venous drainage. So we have superficial and deep. For superficial, you probably could have guessed it by its name, but the superficial location of some of these veins allows for the return of blood from the skin back to the heart. And we can see that here, these superficial veins, they're outside or superficial to the fascia surrounding the muscles. Then for the deep venous drainage, that deep location allows for the return of blood from muscles back to the heart as well as bones. And we can see that here on this image. So we're going to start by talking about the deep venous drainage. And since we're going from the upper limb back to the heart, we're going to start at the most distal end on the hand. And so this is a palmar view of the right hand. And the great thing about the deep venous drainage is that it pretty much matches exactly with the arteries that we've already learned. So we're going to see we have palmar digital veins, we have a common palmar digital vein, and then there's a deep palmar venous arch. There's also a superficial arch, but for this one, we're going to mainly focus on the deep arch. And then from the deep venous arch, we can then see the ulnar vein right here. And we know from the arteries, we also have a radial artery, so we're going to have a radial vein as well right here. Moving to the forearm, we can still see the radial veins right here. And then we've got the ulnar veins here. And I didn't put a label on, but anterior interosseous veins as well here. And so you might be asking, okay, I thought we only had a radial artery, a single ulnar artery. So what's going on here and why do we have two or multiple sets of these veins? What we end up seeing is that nerves are pretty consistent across everybody, not a ton of variation there. Arteries, there can be a little bit more variation, but most people are relatively similar. But then veins, there's a lot of variation. It's basically just however we can get blood back to the heart, we're going to do it. So we'll see multiple veins, we'll see different veins in different places. And so that's kind of what we're seeing with this image here. So on this image, we're just showing there's multiple veins, and we're going to see a lot of venous plexuses as well throughout the body, and especially when we're in lab. So here we've got ulnar veins, radial veins, and then those are going to drain into brachial veins right here. Moving proximally, again, we can see these brachial veins here kind of hanging out by the humerus. And then those brachial veins are going to continue and then drain into the axillary vein right here. And then from the axillary vein, we don't have an image of this, but the axillary vein is then going to go to the subclavian vein, which will then go to the brachiocephalic vein, to the superior vena cava, and then back to the heart. And that is it for the deep venous drainage. So now let's move to the superficial venous drainage. And so again, we're going to start at the hand and move proximally. This is a dorsal view of the right hand. And you can see here that we have these dorsal digital veins on basically all of the digits. And those are going to head back to this dorsal venous network. And from that network, we kind of end up having these two major veins on either side. So one of the veins is more on the inside or the inner surface. The other is on the outer surface. And so the one on the inner surface, we're going to call the basilic vein. One of the translations for basilic is like royal or royalty. And that is actually not the translation that we're using for this. Basilic is actually coming from an Arabic term, which means on the inside or inner. And then same for this outer vein, cephalic is what we're using. Typically, cephalic in anatomy means head, but the Arabic translation is outer, and that's what we're using for this one. So again, we've got this inner vein or basilic vein, then an outer vein or the cephalic vein. Moving proximally, we have an image of a right anterior forearm, and the cephalic and basilic veins are going to wrap around from posterior to anterior. So seeing here, we've got the cephalic vein that's wrapped from posterior to anterior, and then we have the basilic vein on the inner surface wrapping from posterior to anterior. And then as we move up, we can see we've got this connection between the two veins, and that connection is happening right around the elbow. And so we're going to call this the median cubital vein. And the word cubital in anatomy just means elbow, so that's why we're naming it that there. And then from the median cubital vein, the cephalic and basilic veins will continue. So we still have the cephalic vein here, and then the basilic vein continues right here. Now moving to the brachium, we can still see the median cubital vein right here. And then we also still see on the inner surface the basilic vein. And then at this point here, this is called the basilic hiatus, but this is where the basilic vein dives deep. And then it's actually going to join this deeper venous structure here, and that is the axillary vein. And then same thing for the cephalic vein. So we've got the cephalic vein here. And then at this point, this area is called the deltopectoral groove because the cephalic vein is running in between the deltoid muscle and pectoralis major. And then at that point, it's going to also dive deeper and join the axillary vein. And that is it for the superficial venous drainage. So now let's move on to lymphatics for the upper limb. Just a quick review on the lymphatic system. It is a part of the circulatory system, and then it has a couple functions. One of those functions is to convey excess extracellular fluid to the venous system. And then another one of the functions is that the lymphatic system plays a role in immune surveillance. Looking at this image of the right upper limb, in green, we can see a lot of the lymphatic structures here. And then these larger structures are the lymph nodes. And the ones that we're going to be talking about and spending the most time on are the axillary lymph nodes. They get their name because they're found within the axilla. And moving to this diagram, the axillary lymph nodes are actually positioned almost in this pyramid shape. So the most anterior ones are the pectoral nodes, and those are draining like the breast and the anterior thorax. And then laterally, we have humeral lymph nodes, and those are the primary drainage point for the majority of the upper limb. And then posteriorly, there are subscapular nodes, and that's where the posterior thorax and a lot of the scapular area is going to be draining. And then all of these three, kind of these base nodes, they are going to drain into this central node. And then from the central node, that node's then going to drain to this apical node, which will then go to the supraclavicular node here. And then that supraclavicular node will eventually drain into the venous angle, either on the right or left, depending on what upper limb we're in. To see that again on this image here, I just wanted to go over those lymph nodes. So we've got the lateral, or these humeral lymph nodes. You can see right here again, draining the upper limb. And then posteriorly, we have these subscapular lymph nodes, draining the posterior thorax. Anteriorly, we have the pectoral lymph nodes that get the breast and the anterior thorax. And then those are all going to drain into these central lymph nodes, then to the apical lymph nodes, which will then go to the supraclavicular and subclavian. Then one final lymphatics image, the right upper limb we talked about will drain into the subclavian trunk right here. And then that is going to drain into the right lymphatic duct and into this right venous angle right here. So the right upper limb goes to the right lymphatic duct and the right venous angle, whereas most of the rest of the body, including the left upper limb, is going to eventually go into this thoracic duct that we've got right here. And so the left subclavian trunk is going to go into that thoracic duct and then go into the left venous angle here. That is it for the lymphatics, so let's do a quick review. We learned about the deep venous drainage and that the veins pretty much match the arteries of the upper limb almost perfectly. So we've got ulnar, we've got radial veins, they go to brachial veins, and then to axillary, and then throughout to the heart. We also learned about the superficial venous drainage, and that's composed of the cephalic, basilic, and median cubital veins. These are the veins that are typically used to draw blood because of their superficial location. And then we also learned about the lymphatics. So the upper limb lymphatics drain to the axillary lymph nodes, which are positioned almost in a pyramid shape. And then the right upper limb lymphatics drain to the right lymphatic duct and then to the right venous angle. The left upper limb drains to the thoracic lymphatic duct and then to the left venous angle. And that is it for this video on the upper limb veins and lymphatic system.